The Red Rock Hall was magnificent, glittering with crystal chandeliers and tuxedos heavy with medals. I sat with my back straight in the third row, trying to shrink inside my plain, unadorned Class A uniform, invisible amidst this banquet honoring heroes. In the VIP row directly ahead, my father, Colonel Henry Holmes, turned to clap the shoulder of the young major beside him. His voice boomed with regret, loud enough to tear the space apart. Looking at you, I realize God is truly unfair. He gave me no heir. The Holmes line, effectively, died in the cradle 36 years ago. 36 years ago was the day I was born. That sentence hit me like a bucket of boiling water, making my ears ring. My chest constricted, a pain sharper than the time shrapnel embedded itself in my ribs in Syria. He wasn't just disappointed. He had just publicly declared me a dead body to the family honor, while I sat less than 3 feet away. I gripped the classified file in my hand until my knuckles turned white. My father had no idea that the dead body he just mentioned was Captain Kira Holmes, codenamed Ghost Walker, the asset the entire Pentagon was desperate for. And he certainly didn't know that his own arrogant signature had almost killed me. Should I stand up and expose this hypocrite, or swallow the blood rising in my throat to protect the honor he valued more than his daughter's life? The ceremony ended, and the crowd migrated like a herd of well-dressed cattle into the VIP reception room. The air instantly grew heavy with the sweet, oaky scent of expensive bourbon and the thick blue smoke of Cuban cigars, the smell of power in Washington. I stood pressed against a cold marble pillar, clutching a glass of ice water. It was the only thing keeping me grounded, the only thing stopping me from screaming. My father, Colonel Holmes, was the center of the universe tonight. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, laughing that booming, command voice laugh that used to signal safety when I was a child. Now, it just sounded like a gavel banging down a sentence. Surrounding him were aging generals and slick politicians, clinking glasses and toasting to his legacy. I watched them through the rim of my glass. What legacy? Was it this glittering deception? In their eyes, I didn't exist. I was just a shadow cast against the wall of his fame, a blurry background character in the movie of his life. Then, the young major from the front row, Major Mason, stepped up to him. Mason was tall, square-jawed, the absolute picture-perfect poster boy for Army recruitment brochures. My father threw an arm around Mason's shoulders, squeezing him with a warmth, a physical affection that I had not felt in 36 years. Everyone, my father's voice projected, silencing the immediate circle. This is Mason. If I could clone a warrior, he would look exactly like this. The boy just got back from Kandahar with a silver star. The crowd oohed and awed in admiration. Mason smiled, a humble, practiced expression. Thank you, Colonel. I only made it because of your mentorship. I stood 3 steps away, feeling like I was watching a home movie of a happy family I was genetically ineligible to join. A silver star? I took a sip of water to wash down the bile. I was the one monitoring the drone feeds that night. I was the voice in the ear of Mason's forward observer. I was the one who flagged the ambush point so his team could flank the enemy and earn that medal. But I couldn't say a word. Ghost walkers don't get medals. We get shadows. A woman in a silk evening gown, the wife of a prominent senator, drifted toward me. Her eyes scanned my uniform. It was a standard Army Class A, but unlike the peacocks around us, my chest was bare. No ribbons, no medals. To a civilian, a soldier without medals looks like a blank slate, or worse. She looked at my empty chest, then at the glass of water in my hand. "Excuse me, miss," she said. Her voice was polite, trite, and absolutely devastating. "Could you be a dear and fetch me some more cocktail napkins? The bar over there is out." She thought I was the help. She thought I was a waitress wearing a uniform theme. Blood rushed to my face, hot and stinging. My mouth opened. I wanted to say, "I am Captain Holmes, ma'am. I speak 5 languages and I can kill a man with a ballpoint pen." But before I could make a sound, my father turned. He had heard it. He heard every word. This was the moment a father steps in. Instead, he glanced at me. His eyes were hard, devoid of recognition. He looked at me the way one looks at a stain on a carpet. Then he turned his charming smile back to the senator's wife. "My apologies, madam," he said smoothly. "The staff here is a bit slow tonight. Let me call the manager for you." The air left my lungs. He would rather let me be humiliated, let me be reduced to a servant, than admit that the failure standing there was his own flesh and blood. I set my glass down on a passing tray, my hand trembling just enough to make the ice rattle. I turned on my heel and walked away, focusing on keeping my steps rhythmic. Left, right, left, right. Don't run. Soldiers don't run. I pushed into the ladies' room and locked the stall door. My breath came in short, jagged gasps. I gripped the cold porcelain of the sink, staring into the mirror. The reflection showed a 36-year-old woman, sharp features, dangerous eyes, but behind them was a child screaming for her dad to look at her. I thought of my mother. I thought of the worn leather Bible she left on my nightstand before she died. Psalm 27, verse 10. I whispered it to the mirror like a tactical command. "When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up." I repeated it, again and again, until the shaking in my hands stopped. I would not cry. Tears were what my father despised most. He called them liquid weakness. I turned on the faucet, splashing freezing cold water onto my face. The shock of the cold hit my skin, sharp and biting. It felt like the rain. As the water dripped from my chin, the luxury of the hotel bathroom faded. The cold took me back to a different time, a different house where the air was always frigid and love was something you had to earn, like a merit badge. I wiped my face. I wasn't his daughter anymore. I was a ghost. And he was about to learn that ghosts are the only things you can't kill. The shock of the freezing water in the hotel bathroom faded, replaced by a much older, deeper chill. It was the damp cold of a rainy night in Virginia, 24 years ago. When I was 12 years old, our house in the suburbs of Virginia did not look like the other houses on the block. There were no tricycles left in the driveway, no sound of baseball games on the radio, and certainly no smell of buttery popcorn on Friday nights. While the neighbors were having family game nights, the home's residence was operating on Zulu time. Our home was not a sanctuary, it was a forward operating base. Shoes were not just put away, they were aligned with a ruler, heels touching the wall. My bed had to be made so tight you could bounce a quarter off the sheets, a trick my father actually performed on Sunday mornings. He didn't come home from the base like a father returning to his family. He came home like a commanding officer conducting a surprise barracks inspection. Dinner was the most stressful part of the day. We ate at 1800 hours sharp. The meal was always consumed in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the metallic scrape of silverware against fine china. I remember one night my hand slipped. My spoon clattered against the side of my bowl. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. My father didn't yell. He just stopped chewing. He looked at me with those steel-gray eyes and said, "Lack of motor control is a sign of a weak mind, Kira. Focus." If I laughed too loud at a cartoon, it was a lack of emotional discipline. I grew up believing that love wasn't something you were born with. It was a medal. It was a commendation. It was something you had to fight for, bleed for, and earn. And just like a medal, it could be revoked at any moment. I wasn't a natural athlete. I couldn't throw a football 50 yards like the boys next door, which was a constant source of silent shame for the colonel. But I had a different weapon, my ears. I had a gift for languages. I could mimic accents, and I spent hours listening to shortwave radio, teaching myself the guttural rhythms of Arabic and the flowing cadence of Farsi. One afternoon, the sun was streaming through the blinds, and I felt a rare burst of confidence. I had just received my graded French essay back. A big red A+ was circled at the top. It was perfect. I ran into my father's study without knocking. I just wanted to see the corners of his mouth turn up. Just a millimeter. That's all I needed. He was sitting at his mahogany desk, cleaning his Colt 1911. The smell of gun oil and solvent hung thick in the air, the perfume of my childhood. He didn't look up as he wiped the slide with a rag. "Look, Dad," I said, holding out the paper. "I got the highest grade in the class." He glanced at the paper, then at me. His expression didn't change. French, he scoffed. The language of those who surrender. He reached for his silver Zippo lighter. Clink, whoosh. The flame danced in the dim light. He took the corner of my essay, my perfect A+, and held it to the flame. I stood frozen, watching the fire curl the paper, turning my hard work into black ash that floated down onto his pristine carpet. Learn to shoot, Kira, he said, blowing out the lighter. Words don't stop bullets. That was the day I stopped trying to impress him with who I was and started trying to become who he wanted. 6 years later, at the age of 18, I did the unthinkable. I applied to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Not because I loved the Army. I hated the uniform. I hated the rules. But West Point was his cathedral. It was the Holy Land. I thought, if I wear that gray uniform, he will have to see me. The day the acceptance letter arrived, I placed it ceremoniously on the dinner table, right next to his medium-rare steak. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched him pick up the envelope. He read it. Once. Twice. I held my breath. This is it, I thought. This is the moment he smiles. He dropped the letter back onto the table. No smile, no congratulations. He picked up his steak knife and cut a precise square of meat. Did they lower the admission standards again? He asked, chewing slowly. Or do they just need more people to handle the clerical work? The comment cut deeper than any knife. He didn't believe I was capable. He believed I was a statistical error, a glitch in the admissions system. He thought I was destined to be a secretary in camouflage. That night, the sky opened up. It rained hard, a relentless Virginia downpour that turned the world gray. I packed my duffel bag. I didn't say goodbye to my mother. She was already asleep, or pretending to be. I walked to the front door. My father was in the living room, watching the war news on CNN. The blue light of the television flickered on his face. He knew I was leaving for the academy. He didn't turn his head. He didn't get up. He sat there, solid and immovable as a monument. I stood on the porch, the rain instantly soaking my clothes. I looked back through the window at him. Tears mixed with the rain on my face, salty and cold. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to run back in and beg him to love me. But then, something inside me snapped. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a burning, white-hot coal in my stomach. It was rage, pure, high-octane rage. If you have ever tried to move a mountain for someone who wouldn't even lift a finger for you, please hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what was the moment you finally stopped trying to please them? Just right, I stopped, so I know I'm not alone in this. I wiped the water from my eyes and whispered to the storm, a vow that would drive me for the next 18 years. I will not come back to this house, I hissed. Not until I force you to stand at attention and salute me. Not because I am your daughter, but because I am better than you. I turned my back on the house, on the warmth I never felt, and walked into the darkness. That 18-year-old girl died in the rain that night. The ghost walker was born. Let's rewind the clock. 2 weeks before that humiliating night at the Red Rock Hall, I was in a place where medals didn't matter, and the only applause was the sound of incoming mortar fire. We were on the outskirts of Hamara, Syria. The temperature outside was pushing 104 degrees Fahrenheit, a dry, dusty heat that baked the earth into cracked pottery. But inside my Stryker armored vehicle, it was even hotter. The air conditioning had died 3 days ago, leaving me in a metal box filled with the hum of supercomputer servers, the smell of ozone, and the stale reek of 3-day-old sweat. I am Ghost Walker. To the rest of the army, I don't officially exist. My job isn't to kick down doors. My job is to listen. I sat hunched over a bank of glowing monitors, my fingers flying across a custom keyboard. I was scanning every electronic signal within a 50-mile radius. My mission was to provide an invisible shield for Bravo Team, a special forces unit currently moving to raid a suspected insurgent safe house. I adjusted my noise-canceling headphones. To me, the battlefield wasn't a chaotic mix of gunshots and screaming. It was a symphony of sound waves. A burst of static on the UHF band, A cell phone pinging a tower, a radio squelch. These were the notes of life and death. And right now, I was the conductor. Bravo 1 to Ghost. Give me a sit rep. A familiar voice crackled in my ear. It was Sergeant Keller. He was a good man, a Texas native with a thick drawl and a wallet full of pictures of his 5-year-old daughter, Emily. He was also the only operator who knew that I drank my coffee black, no sugar, and made sure there was a fresh pot waiting for me at base. Ghost here, I replied, my eyes darting across the waterfall of data on my screens. The perimeter looks clear, Bravo 1. No cell traffic, no radio chatter. Copy that, Keller said, moving to breach the north entrance. I watched their GPS dots move on my tactical map, but then something made me pause. I narrowed my eyes at the audio spectrum analyzer. There was a gap. A silence in the low-frequency range that shouldn't be there. The ambient noise of the city, the electrical hum of the power grid, the background static, had vanished in a specific 10-block radius. Insurgents don't go that quiet unless they are disciplined, or unless they are waiting. My stomach dropped. It was a passive trigger setup. They weren't using radios, they were using a hardline wire to detonate a trap. Stop! I screamed into the microphone, shattering my own calm. Bravo 1, hold position. Do not breach. I repeat, do not breach. Ghost? Keller's voice was confused. It's a trap, Keller. Passive triggers at the north door. They're waiting for you to break the seal. Pull back. There was 1 second of terrifying silence, a second where trust hangs in the balance. Copy, Keller barked. Team, peel back. Go to the east wall. Now. The GPS dots scrambled away from the building. 3 seconds later, boom. Even inside my armored vehicle, half a mile away, I felt the vibration through the floor. The north entrance of the safe house disintegrated in a massive fireball. If they had walked through that door, Keller and 5 other men would have been nothing but pink mist and dog tags. Holy hell, Keller breathed over the comms, his voice shaking slightly. Ghost, you just saved my ass. Again. I exhaled, slumping back in my chair. Just doing the job, Bravo 1. When we get back to base, Keller said, the swagger returning to his voice, I'm buying you the coldest beer in the Middle East, and I'm showing you the new video of Emily riding her bike. I allowed myself a small, private smile. This was why I did it. This was the difference between me and my father. Colonel Holmes used soldiers like poker chips to win accolades. I used my brain to make sure those chips got put back in the box at the end of the night. I didn't need a medal. I just needed Keller to go home to Texas. I am better than you, Dad, I thought. I save them. You just command them. But my smile vanished a minute later. A new window popped up on my main screen. It was a red alert box flashing urgently. But it wasn't detecting an enemy signal. It was detecting an intrusion into my system. Someone was pinging my vehicle. And they weren't using a hacker's brute force. They were walking right through our firewall like they had the keys to the front door. Then a voice cut through my headphones. It wasn't Keller. It wasn't command. It was a distorted, digitized voice broadcasting on the top-secret frequency that only I and the Pentagon could access. Target identified, the voice hissed, cold and mechanical. Kira Holmes. My blood froze in my veins. Not Ghostwalker, not Asset Alpha. Kira Holmes, my birth name. The name that was supposed to be buried under layers of clearance so deep that even God would need a password to find it. My real name was echoing across the Syrian desert. How? I whispered, my hands freezing over the keyboard. Who is this? Lock confirmed, the voice said. Before I could even attempt to trace the signal, my threat warning system started screaming. It was a high-pitched, manic wail that every soldier dreads. Missile launch detected. I looked at the radar. A laser-guided anti-tank missile had just been fired from a ridge 2 miles away. It wasn't aiming at the infantry. It wasn't aiming at Bravo team. The red crosshairs were locked directly on my striker. Someone had sold me out. And they didn't just want to stop the signal. They wanted to erase Kira Holmes from the face of the earth. Bail out! Move! Move! I screamed the command, lungs burning, but physics was faster than my voice. There was a screeching sound, like a train locking its brakes directly over our heads, followed instantly by a thunderclap that shattered the world. The missile impacted the ground less than 10 meters from our vehicle. The shockwave hit the striker like a giant's hammer. I was thrown sideways, my body ragdolling against the steel hull. My head cracked against a metal support strut. A flash of white light exploded behind my eyes, and then, warm liquid began to trickle down the left side of my face. It tasted metallic. Blood. But I couldn't feel the pain. Adrenaline had already hijacked my nervous system. I scrambled to my hands and knees, coughing through the thick, acrid dust that filled the cabin. "Sound off," I choked out. "Status!" Through the haze, I saw the rear ramp drop open. Sunlight and smoke poured in. And then I saw him. Sergeant Keller. He hadn't made it to cover. He had turned back. He had turned back to pull me out. He was lying on the dirt, thrashing. A piece of shrapnel the size of a dinner plate had torn through his flak vest and embedded itself in his neck. Bright, arterial blood was spraying out in rhythmic jets, painting the beige desert sand a horrifying crimson. "Keller!" I screamed, scrambling over the debris. I slid on the blood-slicked floor, my knees slamming into the ground beside him. I ripped off my gloves and jammed my hands directly into the wound, pressing down with everything I had. "Stay with me, Keller! Look at me!" I yelled, my face inches from his. His eyes were wide, panicked, darting around wildly. "Think about Emily. She's waiting for you in Texas. You are not dying in this dirt." He tried to speak, but only a gurgling sound came out. He gripped my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin with the desperate strength of a dying man. Then the roar of rotors drowned out his shallow breathing. The medevac birds were incoming. "Dust off is here! Hang on!" I cried, tears mixing with the blood on my face. Soldiers swarmed around us. Hands grabbed my shoulders, pulling me backward. "Let me go!" I fought them, thrashing like a wild animal. "I have the pressure. If I let go, he bleeds out." "Step away, Captain," a voice barked. It wasn't a medic. It was hard, aggressive. I was ripped away from Keller with violent force. Two men slammed me against the side of the striker. I looked up, dazed, expecting to see insurgents. Instead, I saw the black armbands of the military police. "What are you doing?" I gasped. "My man is dying." I looked past the MPs. The rest of Bravo team was standing in a defensive perimeter, but their weapons weren't pointed at the horizon. They were pointed at the ground, and their eyes were fixed on me. There was no concern in their faces, only cold, hard hatred. "Why was your name on their channel, Holmes?" One of the corporals shouted, his voice cracking with rage. He gestured to where the medics were loading Keller's limp body onto a stretcher. "You sold us out, didn't you? How much did they pay you?" I stood there, stunned, my hands still dripping with Keller's blood. The accusation hit me harder than the concussion grenade. "No," I stammered, my voice sounding small and weak in the open desert. "I didn't. It was a hack." "Save it for the court-martial," the MP growled. He spun me around and kicked my legs apart. I didn't get to ride in the medical helicopter with Keller. I watched the Red Cross-marked Blackhawk lift off, carrying the only friend I had, carrying him away to surgery that might be too late. Instead, I was shoved into the back of a transport helo. The MP didn't use standard metal handcuffs. He used heavy-duty plastic zip ties. He cinched them behind my back so tight I felt the plastic bite into my wrists, cutting off the circulation. Nobody offered me a bandage for the gash on my head. I sat on the cold metal bench, vibrating with the engine, watching the Syrian landscape recede below. I was a captain in the United States Army. I was the daughter of Colonel Henry Holmes. I was a graduate of West Point. But in that moment, I was treated worse than a stray dog. As the adrenaline faded, the throbbing in my skull began. But the fear in my chest was worse. I closed my eyes and saw my father's face. Would he believe me? Or would he see this as the final confirmation of his life's thesis, that I was never meant for this world? I could hear his voice in the rotor blades. "I told you so. I told you you were weak." We landed at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey. I was marched straight past the infirmary and into the detention block of the Criminal Investigation Division, the CID. They threw me into a holding cell. It was a small box with 4 gray walls, a stainless steel table bolted to the floor, and a fluorescent light that buzzed like an angry hornet. A tall, balding investigator walked in. He didn't introduce himself. He just walked up to me and ripped the Velcro rank patch off my chest. Then, he reached for my neck and yanked off my dog tags. I felt naked, stripped of my name, my rank, and my identity. He tossed a thick file onto the metal table with a loud thud. "Captain Kira Holmes," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You are facing charges of treason, espionage, and aiding the enemy. And if Sergeant Keller dies on that operating table, we are adding manslaughter to the list." He leaned in close, invading my personal space. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You disgrace that uniform," he whispered. I bit my lips so hard I tasted fresh blood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. But I sat frozen, staring at the blank gray wall. "I didn't disgrace it," I screamed internally. "Someone else did. Someone in the shadows put my name on that list." And as the investigator walked out, locking the heavy steel door behind him, a cold resolve settled over me. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to find out who did this. And I was going to make them pay, even if I had to burn the whole system down to do it. 48 hours. That was how long I'd been sitting in that gray box, awake, with nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights to keep me company. My head was pounding with a rhythmic, sickening throb where I had hit the striker's hull, and the dried blood was starting to itch under my hairline. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. The CID officer didn't step inside. He just reached in and slid an old, beige landline phone across the metal table. "You get one call," he said, checking his watch. 5 minutes, and don't bother calling a lawyer. A court-martial doesn't work like civilian court. Unless you have a 4-star general in your pocket, a lawyer can't stop what's coming. He stepped back and crossed his arms, watching me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely pick up the receiver. My fingers hovered over the keypad. "Who do you call when the entire United States government thinks you are a traitor?" I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call a friend. In the moment of my greatest desperation, the 36-year-old captain vanished, replaced by a terrified little girl. Muscle memory took over. I dialed the number for the house in Virginia. The number I'd memorized before I could even tie my shoes. Ring, ring. The sound was a lifeline. I held my breath, praying. "Please pick up. Please be the dad I need, just for once." "Holmes residence," a voice answered. It was him, deep, authoritative, steady. The voice of safety. "Dad." My voice cracked, fracturing into a sob I couldn't hold back. "Dad, it's me. It's Kira." "Kira?" His tone wasn't warm. It was guarded. "Dad, I'm at Incirlik Air Base." I rushed to get the words out, tears streaming down my face, stinging the cut on my cheek. "They arrested me. CID has me in a holding cell. They're saying I'm a spy. They're saying I leaked intel." I gasped for air, gripping the phone cord like it was the only thing keeping me from falling off the earth. "But I didn't do it. You have to help me. Someone hacked the system. Someone used a backdoor to plant my name. You know people. You have pull." "Please, Dad." I stopped, waiting. I waited for the question any father would ask. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" 1 second, 2 seconds. The silence on the line was heavy, filled with static. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. Those 5 seconds lasted longer than the entire mortar attack in Syria. Then, he spoke. His voice was no longer the voice of safety. It was the sound of metal grinding on metal. "The morning papers are already running headlines about a massive leak in a ghost unit," he said. "Is that you?" My heart stopped. "Dad, I was set up. I swear on my honor?" "Honor?" He cut me off, his voice rising to a shout that made me flinch away from the receiver. "You dare use that word. I warned you. I told you that paper pusher intelligence work was garbage. I told you real soldiers fight on the ground." "And now?" Now you have dragged the family name through the mud. Dad, listen to me, I cried, desperation clawing at my throat. I could go to prison for life. They took my rank. Then go to prison like a man, he roared. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. Like a man. Even now, he couldn't see me as his daughter. Do not drag me into your mess, Kira, he continued, his voice trembling with a selfish rage I had never heard before. Next week is the gala. I am receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award. The Pentagon is finally recognizing my legacy. I will not let a traitorous daughter destroy everything I built because she was incompetent. Dad, I whispered, my voice barely a breath. Do not call this number again until you have cleared that name, he spat. Or better yet, don't call at all. I don't have a daughter who is a criminal. Click. Then the dial tone. A long, monotonous drone that signaled the end of my world. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. My hand went limp, and the receiver clattered onto the stainless steel table. He hung up. He didn't ask if I was alive. He didn't ask about the blood on my face. He chose a plastic trophy. He chose a gala dinner with steak tartare and bourbon over the life of his own child. I slid out of the metal chair and collapsed onto the cold concrete floor. I curled into a ball, my knees pressed against my chest, trying to hold myself together because there was no one else to do it. The pain in my head was blinding, but the hole in my chest was infinite. I wanted to die. Right there on the floor of a Turkish prison cell. It would be easier. Just let go. Let the darkness take me. My God, why have you forsaken me? I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But in the darkness, I saw a face. Sergeant Keller. I saw him lying in the dirt, blood spurting from his neck, his eyes wide with fear for his daughter. He had run back into the fire for me. He was fighting for his life right now in a hospital bed because of a lie with my name on it. If I gave up now, if I let my father's rejection kill me, then Keller gets no justice. The person who did this gets away with it. My tears stopped. They didn't dry up. They just stopped coming. I opened my eyes. The gray wall of the cell was still there. The buzzing light was still there. But the little girl who dialed the phone number in Virginia was gone. She died the moment that phone clicked. I wiped the blood and tears from my face with the back of my hand. I sat up. The room felt different. The air felt sharper. My father was right about one thing. I needed to act, but not to save his legacy. To burn it down if I had to. Fine, Colonel, I whispered to the empty room, my voice steady and cold as ice. You won't help me. I will save myself. Fast forward 1 month. I was out on bail, released pending a court-martial that was all but guaranteed to end my life as I knew it. But the Army, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, did not discharge me immediately. Instead, they suspended my security clearance and reassigned me to what they called administrative duties. They sent me to the Pentagon. Not the shiny upper rings with the polished oak doors and the generals walking with purpose. They sent me to the B3 basement level. We called it the data graveyard. My new mission was data entry. I was tasked with digitizing logistics reports from the 1990s into the new archives. It was mind-numbing, soul-crushing work. It was exactly the kind of punishment my father would have designed. He wanted me to be a secretary. Fine. The Army had officially turned me into one. I spent 8 hours a day in a windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and ozone, surrounded by stacks of yellowing paper. But the brass had made a critical mistake, a fatal error. They assumed that by stripping my rank and putting me in a basement, they had declawed me. They forgot that to do data entry, I needed a terminal. And that terminal, ancient as it was hardwired into the Department of Defense's central nervous system. They thought they were burying me. In reality, they had just handed the thief the keys to the vault. I worked like a machine for 3 weeks. I kept my head down. I typed fast. I said, "Yes, sir," and "No, sir," to the 22-year-old supervisor who watched me like a hawk. I played the part of the broken, obedient daughter perfectly. Then came Tuesday. The supervisor, a kid who spent more time on his phone than working, stood up and stretched. "I am grabbing a vanilla latte," he muttered, checking his watch. Don't touch anything you are not supposed to, Holmes. Wouldn't dream of it, I said, not looking up from my typing. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, my demeanor changed. The obedient secretary vanished. Ghostwalker returned. I didn't try to hack the firewall. Hacking leaves fingerprints, it triggers alarms. Instead, I minimized the data entry window and pulled up a command line interface. It was a simple black box with a blinking white cursor. I used my low-level clearance to take a walk. I wasn't breaking in. I was just looking through the windows of the system logs. I navigated through terabytes of data, searching for a specific timestamp. 2 weeks ago. 1400 hours, Syrian time. 3 minutes before the missile hit my striker. I typed in the search query and hit enter. The screen scrolled dizzily with lines of code, and then it stopped. There it was. At exactly 3 minutes before impact, a query had been sent to the personnel database. It requested the real-time GPS coordinates of Asset ID Kira Holmes. But here was the kicker. The request didn't come from a Russian IP address. It didn't come from China or Iran. It came from inside the house. It was an authorized request. "Who are you?" I whispered, my fingers dancing over the keys. I traced the digital footprint of the request. It bypassed the standard security protocols entirely. It didn't hack the door. It walked through a side entrance that had been left wide open. I recognized the code structure. It was a legacy software protocol called Horizon Echo. I froze. Horizon Echo was a data analysis suite installed 5 years ago. It was notorious in the Intel community for being buggy and bloated. I dug deeper into the source code. It had a vulnerability so basic, a freshman computer science student would have flagged it. It allowed remote access without two-factor authentication, as long as you had the administrative master key. The enemy hadn't defeated our encryption. They had simply turned the doorknob of a door that someone had forgotten to lock 5 years ago. I traced the software license. The vendor was Pinecross Analytics. I knew them. They were a private defense contractor, one of those beltway bandits that charged the government billions for mediocre tech because they had friends in high places. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Who approved this? Who let this Trojan horse into our network without a mandatory cybersecurity audit? I pulled up the original procurement contract for Horizon Echo. The PDF file took a few seconds to load. I scrolled past the legal jargon, past the technical specs that were clearly copy-pasted, all the way to the signature page. My breath hitched in my throat. The date was May 12th, 5 years ago. The title of the approving officer, Strategic Advisor, Department of Defense. And there, in black ink, was a signature I knew better than my own face. It was sharp, slanted, and arrogant. It was the same signature that had signed my report cards. It was the same signature that was on the cold, typed Christmas cards I received once a year. Colonel Henry Holmes. My father. I stared at the screen, the white pixels burning into my retinas. He wasn't the spy. He wasn't the one who sold me out to the insurgents. But he was the one who bought the software. He was the one who, in his arrogance and refusal to understand technical jargon, had signed a contract for a faulty system because he was friends with the contractor. He didn't pull the trigger. But he loaded the gun, took the safety off, and left it on the table for the enemy to pick up. His negligence had killed Sergeant Keller. His arrogance had put a target on my back. I sat back in my chair, the basement room suddenly feeling very small and very cold. The realization washed over me, more painful than the shrapnel. My father hadn't just rejected me, his ego had almost murdered me. Digital signatures leave footprints. Most people think a PDF is just a piece of paper behind glass, but to someone like me, it is a crime scene full of DNA. I drilled down into the metadata of the contract my father had signed. I needed to know the context. I needed to know where he was when he authorized a software suite that was practically an open door for terrorists. The system logged the IP address and the geolocation of the device used to apply the electronic signature. It wasn't signed at the Pentagon. It wasn't signed at his home office in Virginia. The geolocation pin dropped on a map of West Virginia, specifically the Greenbrier. For those who don't know, the Greenbrier is a luxury resort. It is where the Washington elite, senators, lobbyists, and generals go to play golf, drink aged whiskey, and make handshake deals that change the course of history. I looked at the timestamp. May 12th, 5 years ago. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. My stomach turned over. I froze, staring at the date. May 12th. That was my 30th birthday. I remembered that day vividly. I was stationed at Fort Bragg. I had sat by my phone all evening, waiting. Just waiting. I didn't want a gift. I didn't want a card. I just wanted my dad to call and say, "Happy birthday, kid." He never called. Now I knew why. At the exact moment I was blowing out a candle on a lonely cupcake in North Carolina, my father was sitting on a clubhouse terrace, probably nursing a glass of scotch, laughing with the CEO of Pine Cross Analytics. He was too busy being a big man to remember his daughter existed. And in that moment of distraction, amidst the clinking of glasses and the smell of expensive tobacco, he had casually signed a contract worth $50 million without reading the safety annex. He traded $50 million of taxpayer money for a slap on the back and a good time. And 6 years later, that signature traded Sergeant Keller's blood and my honor for a glitch he couldn't be bothered to understand. I dug further. I found an archived email attached to the contract approval. It was sent from my father's BlackBerry. God, he loved that outdated thing, to Bob, the CEO of Pine Cross. The message was short. It was the smoking gun. Approved. Just get it installed, Bob. And don't bother me with that tech mumbo-jumbo in the appendix. I trust you. Tech mumbo-jumbo. He called the encryption protocols that keep soldiers alive mumbo-jumbo. Rage, hot and violent, erupted in my chest. It was different from the sadness I felt in the prison cell. This was pure fury. He always mocked me. He called me a desk jockey. He called my work paper pushing. He claimed that real warriors held rifles, not keyboards. But here was the truth, staring me in the face. The real warrior was too lazy to do his job. He didn't kill men with a gun. He killed them with his intellectual arrogance. He killed them because he thought he was too important to read the fine print. I printed the contract. I printed the email. 3 sheets of paper. They felt light in my hand, but they had the weight of a guillotine blade. I sat there in the basement, the hum of the servers surrounding me. I faced the ultimate dilemma. If I filed this report, Colonel Henry Holmes was finished. The Lifetime Achievement Award? Gone. His pension? Stripped. He would be investigated, humiliated, and discharged in disgrace. The legacy he cherished more than his own family would be pulverized into dust. I looked at my cell phone, sitting on the desk. It had been a month. Not a single missed call from him. He had abandoned me in that Turkish prison. He was ready to let me take the fall, to let me rot in a cell for treason, just to keep his reputation spotless. "You taught me to be honest, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "You drilled the honor code into me until I could recite it in my sleep. A cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do." Well, Colonel, I am not going to tolerate you anymore. I know this is heavy, but I need to ask you guys something. Have you ever had to choose between protecting a family member and doing what you knew was morally right? It's the hardest choice in the world. If you're with me, please smash that like button right now. And drop a comment below saying, "Truth first," if you believe the truth matters more than blood. I really need to know I'm not crazy for doing this. I didn't file the complaint under my own name. If I did, the narrative would be spun. They would say I was a bitter, estranged daughter seeking revenge. They would say I was acting out of spite because he cut me off. I needed to be objective. I needed to be a ghost. I drafted a report. It was 8 pages long, no emotion, no sob story about my birthday, just raw data. The intrusion logs, the vulnerability analysis of the Horizon Echo software, and finally, the chain of custody for the approval. The contract signed at the Greenbrier, and the email dismissing the security protocols. I scrutinized the final page. Where a signature was required, I typed a pseudonym. Reporting Officer A. Marsh. It was a little play on words. A Mars, the god of war? Or perhaps Anonymous Marshal, the silent enforcer. I opened the secure portal for the Department of Defense Inspector General. I added General Anders, the head of my unit, to the recipient list. My finger hovered over the enter key. Once I did this, there was no going back. I was effectively executing my father's career. I was becoming the dead body he claimed I was. But then I thought of Keller's daughter in Texas. She deserved to know why her daddy almost didn't come home. I pressed send. The screen flashed. Message sent successfully. The bullet had left the chamber. It was traveling through the fiber optic cables at the speed of light. It couldn't be recalled. Now, all I had to do was wait for the impact. For 48 hours after I hit send on that email, the world did not end. In fact, it was terrifyingly quiet. I expected the military police to kick down the door of the basement. I expected a team of federal agents to drag me out in handcuffs for unauthorized access to classified contracts. But there were no sirens, no shouting, just the hum of the servers and the rhythmic clacking of keyboards in the data graveyard. I continued to show up for work at the Pentagon, sitting at my desk in the B3 basement level. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was subtle, like the drop in barometric pressure before a tornado. When I walked down the corridors to the restroom, conversations stopped. High-ranking officers, men with stars on their shoulders, would glance at me and then quickly look away, whispering behind their hands. The building knew. The rumors were circulating in the upper rings, leaking down through the ventilation shafts. A storm was forming, and I was standing right in the eye of it. I sat at my desk for lunch, unwrapping a dry ham sandwich I'd bought from the vending machine down the hall. It tasted like cardboard and preservatives. It was a pathetic meal, eaten in a windowless room. While upstairs, my father was likely enjoying a 3-martini lunch at the officers' club. But as I chewed the stale bread, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The fear was gone. The desperation was gone. I had told the truth. Whatever happened next, I could sleep at night. Then, late Friday afternoon, the silence broke. A crisp, uniformed officer materialized at the entrance of my cubicle. He wasn't a military police officer. He was a captain, wearing the aiguillette of a general's aide-de-camp. "Captain Holmes," he said. I looked up, wiping crumbs from my mouth. I braced myself for the handcuffs. But his tone wasn't aggressive. It was respectful. There was even a hint of fear in his eyes, like he was standing next to a live grenade. "General Anders requests your presence at the Red Rock Hall tonight," he said. 1900 hours. My heart skipped a beat. "For what purpose, Captain?" "To conclude the investigation, ma'am." I stared at him. Red Rock Hall. Tonight was the gala. Tonight was the night my father was receiving his Lifetime Achievement Award. Why would General Anders want me there? Did they plan to arrest me publicly? Did they want to drag me on stage and force me to apologize to my father in front of the entire Washington elite to save his reputation? "I'll be there," I said, my voice steady. I went back to my apartment. It was a small, cramped studio in Arlington that I could barely afford. Since the investigation began, the government had frozen my bank accounts. My credit cards were dead plastic. I had $12 in my wallet and half a jar of peanut butter in the cupboard. I couldn't afford to take my dress uniform to the dry cleaners. I pulled my old Class A uniform out of the closet. It smelled faintly of mothballs. I set up the ironing board in the middle of the living room and plugged in my cheap plastic iron. Hiss. Swish. Hiss. The steam rose up, filling the small room with the smell of warm wool. The rhythmic motion took me back to my dorm room at West Point. I remembered standing there at 18, ironing my plebe uniform until the creases were sharp enough to cut skin. Duty, honor, country. Those 3 words were embroidered on the flag of my alma mater. My father loved to quote them in his speeches, but tonight I was going to live them. I put on the jacket. It fit perfectly, hugging my frame like a second skin. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. My chest was bare. I didn't put on my ribbons. I didn't put on my unit citations. I didn't want any decorations. I wanted to walk into that hall naked, stripped of everything except my name and my rank. Just a soldier. I checked the time, 6:55 in the evening. I took a cab to the Red Rock Hall, using the last of my cash to pay the driver. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the imposing stone building. Through the heavy oak doors, I could hear the muffled sounds of a string quartet playing Mozart. I could hear the low rumble of polite laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. It was my father's world, a world of handshakes, backroom deals, and fake smiles. A world where a signature on a golf course meant more than a soldier's life in the desert. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool evening air. The last time I was here, in the opening of this story, I was a victim. I was a daughter cowering in her chair, paralyzed by her father's words. Not tonight. I squared my shoulders. I adjusted my cover. I wasn't walking in there to beg for forgiveness. I was walking in there to deliver a verdict. I reached out and pushed the heavy doors open. The light from the chandeliers spilled out, blindingly bright. "The game is over, Colonel." I walked down the central aisle of the Red Rock Hall. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the cavernous room, sealing me inside. I moved to the third row, the exact same spot where I had sat at the beginning of this nightmare, invisible and small. But the woman sitting there now was not the invisible daughter. On the stage, the ceremony was in full swing. My father was standing at the podium, basking in the golden glow of the spotlights. He looked magnificent in his dress blues, his chest heavy with rows of colorful ribbons and medals that caught the light. He was smiling, a practiced, charismatic smile, waiting for General Anders to pin the Lifetime Achievement Award on his lapel. Then his eyes flicked down. He saw me. The smile vanished instantly. His jaw tightened, and a flash of irritation sparked in his eyes. He made a subtle, sharp motion with his head. A silent command. "Get out." He thought I was there to cause a scene. He thought I was the disgraced criminal daughter coming to ruin his big night with my scandal. He turned back to General Anders, expecting the ceremony to continue, expecting the help to remove me. General Anders stepped up to the microphone. The room went quiet. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone beneath the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Anders said, his voice grave and amplified by the speakers. "We are here tonight to honor a legacy. But a legacy is not built on toasts or medals. It is protected by truth." The atmosphere in the room shifted. My father frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. This wasn't the script. 2 weeks ago, Anders continued, his voice hardening, we almost lost an entire special forces team and a critical intelligence network in Syria. Not because of enemy action, but because of a systemic failure here at home. Negligence. A murmur rippled through the crowd of senators and officers. My father stiffened, his posture rigid. He still didn't understand. But fortunately, Anders looked directly at my father, holding his gaze for a long, uncomfortable second before shifting his eyes to the third row. "We have an officer brave enough to find that flaw, even when it meant standing alone against the entire system. A soldier who operates in the shadows, who asks for no credit." He paused for effect. "I would like to invite Captain Kira Holmes, codename Ghostwalker, to the stage." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, a collective gasp swept through the room. I stood up. My legs felt heavy but steady. I smoothed the front of my unadorned Class A uniform. I stepped into the aisle. Click, click, click. The sound of my heels on the polished hardwood floor echoed like gunshots in the quiet hall. Time seemed to warp, slowing down into a cinematic crawl. Every face was turned toward me. Generals, senators, the Washington elite. They looked at my bare chest, my lack of ribbons, and then at my face. They saw the determination carved there. But I only saw one face. My father. As I climbed the stairs to the stage, I watched the color drain from his face. He looked at me with a mixture of horror and bewilderment. He didn't understand. Why was I the hero? Why was the dead body walking toward him? I stood next to him. I was close enough to smell his cologne, the same scent that had lingered in the hallway the night I left for West Point in the rain. General Anders handed me a thick folder. On the large projection screen behind us, a slide appeared. It displayed a single name in bold black letters, Horizon Echo. "Captain," Anders said, handing me the microphone. "This is the software vulnerability you identified, the one that allowed the enemy to track our troops." I took the microphone. My hand didn't shake, not even a tremor. I looked at my father. He was staring at the screen. His eyes were wide, fixed on the words, Horizon Echo. I saw the moment the memory hit him. I saw the realization crash into him like a physical blow. The golf course at the Greenbrier. The whiskey. The casual signature on my 30th birthday. The email dismissing the security protocols as mumbo-jumbo. He knew. He looked at me, and for the first time in 36 years, the arrogance was gone. The great colonel had evaporated. In his place was a terrified old man. He realized that he was the threat. He was the negligence. He had almost killed his own daughter and her team. I held the microphone. I held his destruction in my hand. I could say it. I could say, "My father signed this contract because he was too lazy to read it." I could strip him of his pension, his award, and his dignity right here, on live television. I could make him pay for every cold dinner, every burned test paper, every moment of neglect. The room waited. My father held his breath, his eyes pleading, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. But I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized something. Breaking him wouldn't bring Keller's health back. It wouldn't undo the past. And I didn't need to destroy him to prove I was better. My mercy proved that. "The report is filed, General," I said into the microphone, my voice calm and clear, ringing through the hall. "The vulnerability has been patched. I was just doing my duty to protect my team." I didn't expose him. I didn't need to. The truth was already screaming in his head, louder than any accusation I could make. I handed the microphone back to Anders. Then, I turned to face my father. I snapped my heels together. I straightened my back. I looked him dead in the eye. My father stood there, trembling. He looked at me, the daughter he had called a failure, the daughter he had left in a prison cell. And he saw what he had never been able to become, a true soldier. A warrior who valued the mission over the glory. Slowly, painfully, his right hand began to rise. It wasn't the crisp, sharp salute of a commanding officer. It was shaky. His hand moved up to the brim of his cap. His eyes were swimming with tears. He held the salute, his fingers quivering against his temple. It was a salute of submission, a salute of apology, a salute of absolute respect from a subordinate to a superior. I held his gaze. I let the silence hang for a heartbeat, letting the weight of his acknowledgement sink into my soul. Then I raised my hand. Sharp. Precise. Perfect. I returned the salute. In that moment, the war between us ended. I hadn't just won the battle, I had won the peace. And as I lowered my hand, I knew I was finally free. The fallout happened fast, and it happened quietly. That is the Washington way. When a scandal is too big to fix, you bury it before the ink dries on the morning papers. The next morning, the headlines didn't scream about treason or faulty software. They didn't mention Horizon Echo or the near miss in Syria. Instead, a short, dignified press release was issued by the Department of Defense. Colonel Henry Holmes voluntarily returns the Lifetime Achievement Award and resigns from all advisory positions due to declining health. Health reasons. It was the oldest euphemism in the Beltway playbook. It was the polite way of saying a man had fallen on his sword. I sat in General Anders's office reading the memo. I knew exactly what my father had done. If he had tried to fight the report, if he had tried to argue his case, the media would have started digging. They would have found the emails. They would have found the vulnerability. And eventually, they would have found me. They would have exposed the identity of Ghostwalker to the world. By resigning immediately, by taking the shame onto his own shoulders without a fight, he had killed the story. He had protected my anonymity. It was the first time in his life he had put the mission and his daughter's safety above his own ego. "He took the hit for you, Holmes," General Anders said, looking out the window. He knew if this went to trial, your cover would be blown. He chose silence. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. It was the most fatherly thing he had ever done. My suspension was lifted immediately. My rank was not only restored, it was elevated. I walked out of that office as Major Kira Holmes, assigned to a new task force within the Intelligence Support Activity, the ISA. Life went back to normal, or at least a new version of it. But the silence from Virginia remained. 1 week later, I returned to my apartment in Arlington after a long shift. My mailbox was usually empty, filled only with junk flyers and bills. But today, there was a small brown package sitting inside. It was wrapped in plain paper. There was no return address, but I didn't need one. I recognized the handwriting on the label. It was sharp, slanted, and disciplined. My heart did a slow roll in my chest. I carried the package upstairs, my hands trembling slightly as I set it down on my kitchen counter. I cut the tape. Inside, nestled in a bed of packing peanuts, was a small velvet box. The red fabric was worn around the edges, faded by time and touch. I opened it. Sitting on the white satin cushion was a ring. It wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was a massive chunk of 14-karat gold, set with a dark, polished stone. It was his West Point class ring, class of 1978. I gasped, the sound loud in the quiet apartment. I knew this ring. I knew it better than I knew the back of my own hand. My father wore it every single day. He used to tap it against the dinner table when he was thinking. He used to polish it every Sunday night while watching the news. He had told me once, when I was 10 years old, "This ring is the symbol of a true warrior, Kira. It represents the long gray line. I will be buried wearing this." And now, it was sitting on my counter. I looked for a note. I checked the box, turned it over, shook the packaging. There was no letter. There was no card saying, "I'm sorry," or "I love you," or "I was wrong." Men of Henry Holmes's generation didn't write apology letters. They didn't talk about their feelings. They dealt in symbols. Sending me this ring was louder than any scream. He was abdicating. He was surrendering his sword. By giving me the one object that defined his identity as a soldier, he was admitting the truth he couldn't speak. You are the better soldier. You are the one who deserves to carry the legacy. I picked it up. It was heavy, dense with the weight of history and expectation. I tried to put it on my ring finger, but it was far too large. It slid right off. It was a man's ring, made for a hand that had gripped rifles and signed treaties. So, I slid it onto my right thumb. It fit there, loose but secure. The gold was cold against my skin at first, but as I held it there, feeling the weight of it, the metal began to warm up. A strange sensation washed over me. For 36 years, I'd carried a burning ball of anger in my gut. I'd carried the resentment of a neglected child, the fury of an overlooked daughter. I thought I needed him to say the words. I thought I needed him to beg for forgiveness. But looking at that ring on my thumb, I realized the anger was gone. It had evaporated like mist in the morning sun. He had given me everything he had left. It was enough. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just free. The next morning, I stood by the window of my new office at the Pentagon. The view was spectacular. Below me, the Potomac River flowed steadily toward the ocean, glittering under the morning sun. In the distance, the white marble of the monument stood silent and proud. I looked down at my hand. The heavy gold ring glinted in the sunlight. It wasn't a shackle anymore. It was just a piece of metal, a reminder of where I came from, but not a definition of where I was going. The secure phone on my desk began to ring. It was a harsh, insistent trill. I turned away from the window. I didn't hesitate. I didn't flinch. I picked up the receiver. "Major Holmes," I said, my voice steady and clear. "We have a situation in the Black Sea." The voice on the other end said, "We need a ghost." I smiled. I touched the ring on my thumb one last time, a silent acknowledgement to the old man in Virginia. And then I let go. "I'm ready," I said. "Send the data." I am Kira Holmes. I am not just a daughter. I am not just a survivor. I am Ghostwalker. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am fighting for. Through this story, I realized a profound truth that I think we all need to hear. You do not need an apology to heal. We often spend our entire lives waiting for the people who hurt us to finally say, "I'm sorry," believing that their validation is the key to our peace. But this story proves that true freedom doesn't come from changing their minds. It comes from freeing your own heart. If you are still waiting for closure from someone who is incapable of giving it, please stop. Your resilience is your closure. Your integrity is your validation. You are enough right now, just as you are. I poured a lot of emotion into telling this story because I know how heavy the burden of family expectations can be. If this ending brought you a sense of relief or peace, please hit that like button right now. It's a small action that helps me continue creating stories like this for you. I also want to ask you a personal question. Have you ever had to forgive someone who never admitted they were wrong just to find your own peace? Please simply comment, "I chose peace" below if you have. I read every single comment and I want to support you. Don't forget to subscribe so we can start the next journey together. Thank you for listening.